But yes, this rather unassuming little group of pottery and glass has some quite interesting stories to tell. For a start, you've got pieces like this, which were lying basically like that. It was in one piece and then it's been trodden on on the spoil heap. Now if you saw that, I'm sure you wouldn't even bother to look at that twice or even once. But if you look at it, there's certain keys with pottery. You often have two flat surfaces which are broadly parallel. Some stones do, but you have flat surfaces, and then you look at the edge and it's got a very slight curve on it. If you had a bigger bit, you'd see more of a curve to it. And this is basically the rim of a bowl. Quite a large thing. You have walls down to about there probably, and come across. And that's the sort of thing people are using for separating cream off milk in the dairy, and possibly making bread in. This one does seem to have the remains of some external sooting on, so it's probably been used for dairying, because you heat the milk in the bowls to separate off the cream, I'm told. Never done it. This particular rim shape, you'll note the shape of the rims is often different, and different potters make different shaped rims, and the rim shapes change over time. This particular rim shape is what you get pretty much in the 14th, early 15th century.
Really?
Yeah. Before that you get thinner. Pottery is contrary to what you'd expect, so you might think something crude like that would be earlier, something rather fine like that would be later. It's actually the other way around. The finer stuff tends to be earlier. If we had any 12th century stuff, which I wasn't able to find sadly, that would be even thinner and even finer. So the 12th century pot is really beautifully thin-walled, wonderful stuff.
Oh right. So you found these bits from?
They're all just on the, most of it just on the banks where you've sort of tapered the ground.
So I guess then, because we found the remains of a medieval rectory, so and the rector at that point would have been a fairly well-off person, I guess. So would
everybody uses pottery. We've got a long-term research project at a medieval palace site up in Sherwood Forest, and you get all the Plantagenet at Kings of England are going there, but there's plenty of pottery on site. So the main thing is medieval potters don't make many products. Rather dark photo because it's in a very dark store in Nottingham. They're jugs. These are also jugs. It's fairly obvious what jugs are for, I suspect. These are jars. And because they tend to be quite fragile, I've got in pictures of bowls. But they're the three main things that medieval potters make.
But they've all had a glaze and some have worn off? Or
no.
Just some are glazed?
Generally, ignore that one. Most jars are unglazed because they're for cooking and storage. Glaze in the medieval period is decorative. It's always on the outside, not the inside. So they're not bothering to waterproof the pots with glaze. They're using it as a decorative feature. And generally glazed stuff is jugs, unglazed stuff will be the jars and the bowls. That one is an aberration and they've glazed it for some reason. So perhaps that wasn't intended to be a cooking pot, perhaps that was for some other purpose. One of the other things they do, if you note the body down here, that's quite a white clay. The jars, that was dirty, but they tend to be orange. And that's a deliberate choice of clay. The colour of the pot is down to the amount of iron in the pot, primarily, and then the atmosphere in the kiln when you're firing it. You can control the atmosphere in the kiln by stoking the fire. So if you stoke the fire hot, it burns up all the oxygen, and you have no oxygen in the kiln. That means the iron in the clay doesn't have any oxygen to bond with. If you let oxygen in, the iron can bond with the clay, and then you get iron oxides, so rusts, oranges, reds, browns. So these sorts of things have been fired in an oxidising atmosphere, where they've let the oxygen into the kiln during firing. The darker colours, the greys particularly, and the very dark blacks, greys and all that sort of colour. You can make pretty much with exactly the same clay. You just have to exclude the oxygen from the kiln, and then at the end of the firing you block up the flue so that no oxygen can get in until the temperature's gone down enough that the iron no longer reacts. So you could basically use the same clay to produce that, and it's just how you stoke your kiln.
So why would they choose to do one type over the other? Any particular reason?
Fashion?
Just literally just for the colour?
There is fashion, but there's also clay is made up of minute particles, and they have chemically combined water, and then they have water that's just between them. The particles will start to melt at a lower temperature if you're excluding the oxygen from the kiln.
Right.
And that, when they start to melt, it makes the pot stronger and less porous.
Right.
So they can use less fuel basically to get a more waterproof pot if they exclude the oxygen during firing. They'll often then let oxygen in at the end because they want the orange colour or the white colour.
Oh, right, okay.
So a lot of these jugs, when you look at them broken, you'll find that it's grey inside, but then white on the outside because they let the oxygen in at the end because they wanted that colour.
Oh, right, okay.
So one of the reasons they're using the white coloured clays is because they put copper in a lead glaze to get this sort of vibrant green colour.
Oh, right.
That's basically one of those.
Oh, right.
So it's a lead glaze and they put copper in it as a colourant. And if you look at it side on, you can see it's grey on the inside,
Yeah.
kind of light grey on the outside. If you put that kind of glaze on an orange pot, you get not such a vibrant green colour. So purely because they want this green, they're choosing the iron-free clays, and they're making their jugs with iron-free clays. You can actually see a bit of an orange clay vessel stuck to this one. So they're firing those alongside those. When you turn them upside down, you can often see the remains of one of those stuck to one of those, or one of those stuck to one of those. Fashion, it's not a modern thing. It's very, very old, as old as humanity, really. And people will do things that are non-functional just because they want this vibrant green colour on their jugs. Yeah.
So out of all of these bits, that's the one that you
That's-
found most interesting?
That's it's the oldest.
Oh, right.
So, yeah. Following on from that, again, fashion, but also some function. These are very typical of the 13th and 14th century. These are from Nottingham. If you come into Derbyshire, there's slightly different things going on, but in Ticknall, they've got a medieval pottery industry and they're making these light firing jugs. Ticknall isn't very far down the road, and it has a major pottery industry in the Tudor period, basically. It's probably supplying the local area in the medieval period, but it really takes off in the Tudor period, and it starts making these things, which I thought I had a photo of, but I've obviously taken out for some other display somewhere, which is annoying. This would be a big cistern, so round neck, a couple of handles up here, spots of glaze down the body, none on the inside, so decorative again, and a spigot hole down near the bottom, and that they put wooden tap in, and they brew beer in it, and then you decant the beer off at the bottom. And these broadly come in with the widespread adoption of hops. Before that, you buy your beer from the alewife, and it's not made with hops, and it goes off quite quickly. Once you get hops, you can brew beer and keep it for longer. And so most households will probably have a load of these out in one of the sheds in the garden with their beer brewing, because water isn't particularly good to drink, because people put things in it when they're washing out there. So if you brew it into beer, the alcohol kills all the nasty microorganisms in it and you don't get sick and die. Ticknall produces this. It's very highly fired, so if I were to tap one of the medieval bits, that's high fired as well. It tends to be a more dull kind of sound. This is fired up to a temperature where those clay particles are starting to melt and fuse together, so it's fairly impermeable to liquids, and it gets all over the East Midlands. Chemical analysis has shown that a lot of the late medieval and early post-medieval pots found in Lincoln are made in Ticknall, and Leicester. There's tons of Ticknall stuff in the late Austin Friars deposits before the dissolution.
Oh right. How come
So-
Ticknall was a bit of a hotspot? Because of the raw materials?
It's got a whole series of different clays within the parish.
Oh,
It's got lead, it's got iron,
Oh right. Just lucky.
and it's presumably got a landlord that's interested as well.
Oh, I see. Yeah, invested in it.
Yep. And pretty much every family, well, not every family, but most of the families in the village are all potting. They're also farming at the same time.
Yeah.
Quite how they supplied such a large area, I don't know. But potting's a seasonal activity. You can't dry pots in winter, so you have to dig the clay over winter after harvest, probably leave it on the common weathering, because bacteria and frost and everything will break it down and make it more plastic, better to throw with. And then you're potting and drying the pots and firing them over summer, because if the pots go in the kiln wet, they go off like grenades, apparently. Which is not good. And they just capture the market and they kill off all the industries like Nottingham. All these urban industries in the late medieval period just disappear. It's probably partly the urban authorities not wanting these industries that burn the town down every now and again, and also produce lots of smoke and everything. All the sort of urban potteries that existed beforehand give way, and these potteries like Ticknall, and there's one down at Chilverscoaton in Nuneaton, Renthorpe in South Yorkshire. And these kind of take over these huge areas and just supply these pots over a large area. Along with these big jars, they make these things, of which this is a rather poor replica of. And these are a few examples that were in the garden. So you can see it's got a very nice glaze, much nicer than the glaze on this. And also very thin-walled.
Yeah.
Go on, hand it round. If you found that, you'd probably think that was modern, wouldn't you?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I'll pay it no attention at all.
That stuff is made alongside the Midland Purple in Ticknall, and also the other places I've mentioned. And it's generally these
It's really nice.
kind of thistle-shaped cups. They're actually the first ceramic drinking vessels. Before that, it's jugs, jars and bowls. Around 1475-ish, we don't know precisely when they came in, but somewhere around there, they suddenly start making these cups. And there's obviously a change in dining habits, where everyone suddenly wants these ceramic cups. The early ones often have a whole variety of different religious symbols, so you get stuff that's symbolic of the Trinity and various other things. Obviously, at the dissolution and everything, that kind of falls out of favour, and they go into decline for a bit. But they do continue producing, and they produce plain ones as well as decorated ones, and the pottery evolves. And so you go from this, if you feel that, it's very sandpapery.
Oh yeah.
And that's because the clay's got a lot of sand in it. The reason you have stuff in clay, if you have a very pure clay, it'll shrink a lot as it dries, and you'll get cracks around the base, any sharp change of angle. Where the pot's slightly thicker, the clay will shrink more and then it'll crack. So if you have clay with sand in, it allows it to not shrink as much, basically. You'll often find on medieval jugs, if they've got thick handles, they'll use a different mix of clay with more sand in the handle, so the handle dries at the same rate as the pot. And if you use the same mix, you'd find that your handles detach from the pot as the pot shrinks and dries, and the handle doesn't shrink as much. These come in kind of late 16th century. So these are the sort of things that the people that are building and worshipping in your brand new church would actually be using. And everyone has them at the Royal Palace that I mentioned. We get a lot of these and a lot of these in the demolition deposits. Actually no eating pottery. So the workmen they bring their big cistern of ale down and they bring their cups, and as they're smashing the palace up, they're quaffing, breaking. So this stuff evolves Midland purple and the Cistercian ware evolves into what we call black and brown glazed earthenware, because archaeologists are imaginative. Clue in the name. So, and the finer black wares.
Oh yeah, it's quite got a sheen to it.
It's very attractive.
And again, you might think that was 1960s
Yeah.
Woolworths or whatever.
Totally, yeah, that really kind of psychedelic.
And basically, this stuff evolves into this in the middle of the 17th century, so around the Civil War. You get the change, and you get a whole variety of different types. So these are 17th century. You can see the glaze is, don't know about improved, technically it's improved. Into, I do like the Cistercian ware glaze, but you get these ribs on the bodies of the pot. They're decorative, so Cistercian ware, black ware. You get these wooden tankards, and they're built with staves like a barrel, and they're bound round here and here with binding to hold those staves together. So these cute little wooden tankards with a lid. Potters start copying these, and they actually copy the binding as well. And over time, the actual meaning of it gets lost, but you still get this ribbon that's
It
basically...
becomes just a decoration.
Yeah. So, same on that one. It's this ribbing. It usually occurs near the bottom and part way up.
That's right.
Just as a...
That's why tankers look like tankers.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, the thing really that changes, that allows me to tell this from this, is the fact that that's very sandy. When it evolves into the black wares, it's very smooth. It doesn't have quartz in the clay. So you've got a much smoother clay body.
Yeah, interesting.
Around the same time, they're making this kind of stuff, which again, you might think quite modern.
Quite like TG green, the colour that they
Yeah.
do, the Gresley.
Yeah.
Gresley.
It's a Ticknell one, again. And this comes alongside the late Cistercian ware, and particularly in the 17th century. There's lots of this called Midland Yellow, Midlands Purple, Midland Yellow. Also available in green, also available in orange and in green and in white, but usually purple, usually yellow. So, iron-rich clay, iron-poor clay, very little iron, some iron, hence why it goes yellow. Very common in the 17th century. Some foreign visitors. Really, Ticknell is making stuff that's pretty much stoneware in the Tudor period, but the Germans get credited with inventing stoneware in the late medieval period, and they start exporting it in very large quantities in the late medieval period. The London port books and Boston, they've got records of German vessels coming in their tens of thousands, basically, right in the 15th century and onwards. In the 17th century, you get these happy little chappies. These are late 16th, early 17th century, when they've got a fairly artistic face, although the slightly earlier ones have even more artistic faces. As you get into the 17th century, they get plainer and they get angrier. This one at the back has got a really... But they look like this. They're very high-fired stoneware. They're completely impervious to liquids, and they're used as transporters before we have glass bottles. So that came all the way from Germany, from a place called Frechen, which I think is actually now in Belgium, but was German, in the 17th century. They are sometimes found as witch bottles. People fill them with all sorts of things like nails, nail clippings, urine and hair, and put a cap in them and then bury them in the thresholds to stop the witches coming over the thresholds, keep them out of your house. But they're also used in large quantities as durable containers for liquids. Chinese porcelain is very desirable, and occasional bits come across in the late medieval period. English potters have always been trying to copy white pots because there's a big market for them. There's a variety of experiments that they managed to do, which progressed through to the modern pots that we don't use because we've been using paper cups. But if we were using ceramic cups, the white sort of porcelains and earthenwares that we've got now are the result of a long evolution of various different types. The earliest of these types we've got here, although there's a very beautiful tin-glazed earthenware one that was found out in the excavation, which I saw yesterday, which is lovely. In the 18th century, they are making stonewares from iron poor clays, and if you look at this one and move it in the light, you'll see that the glaze isn't smooth. It has a sort of orange peel type texture to it. You do have to get the light right to see it.
It's very fine as well.
Very thin pot. The way they make salt glazed stoneware, again there's a clue in the name. You fire the kiln up to about 1200 degrees centigrade, which is quite warm, and then you shovel salt into the top of the kiln. That salt turns into a vapour. You get a whole load of sulphuric acid pours out of the top of the kiln, but the vapour within the kiln settles on any exposed part of the pots, and it reacts with the silica and alumina and all sorts of things in the pot to form a glaze. But because that's formed by vapour, it's not a smooth glaze like you get when you actually apply a liquid glaze to a pot. So that's where you get that sort of orange peel texture. And that really comes in about 1700, maybe 1690 in some places, and goes through to about 1780. So just your little white bit of pot could actually be diagnostically 18th century. And there's enough of this one that I can tell you that this is part of the saucer for a tea bowl. Yes. The main thing that the potters are trying to copy when they're making these white pots initially, the desirable Chinese stuff, is teawares. So whatever status you are, if you have any pretensions of grandeur, you'll want to have some tea bowls and a teapot. If you save up for years, if you're a labourer, you might be able to buy one tea bowl. And you add to your set as time goes on. If you're very rich, you're just buying a set. But we're basically at the bottom of the vicarage garden here, so your vicar has got certainly at least one set of salt glazed stoneware tea bowls. I imagine he'd have had a Chinese teapot or something like that to go with it. They progress, and apparently this stuff was unhygienic, is one of the things that's said, probably just Wedgwood marketing propaganda. But this stuff is really hard wearing, it's durable, it's stoneware, it's lovely, I really like it. But Wedgwood managed to propel the fashion back towards earthenware. Here's earthenware. I have no creamware, which is what he marketed and likes to claim, or liked to claim, obviously he's been dead for quite a long time. Liked to claim he invented, he didn't invent it, but he did popularise it. That has a yellowish tint, and if you put it on a piece of white paper, you can see it's distinctly yellowish. The earlier stuff is very yellow, the later just has a yellow tint to it. Chinese porcelain is a cold white. If you've ever seen any, it is quite a cold white colour. So what they started doing to counteract the little bit of iron in the clay was they added some cobalt, and the cobalt gives it a slight blue sheen. So particularly if you compare it to that, you can see it's got this bluish sheen to it. So if you put a bit of Woolworths on a piece of white paper and you see it's bluish, you can say, that's got cobalt in the glaze. It's particularly obvious under the foot ring where the glaze is thicker. And you would know, if you're a pot nerd, that comes in about 1780 and has gone by about 1850. But you can say more about this one. They find that the only colour that will actually survive the temperatures they need to fire a pot to put glaze on is blue initially, cobalt. And right up to 1780 there are no other colours that will survive the glazing firing, so they have to apply the other colours on top of the glaze, and then they often rub off. Around the 1780s there's improvements in chemistry and all that sort of thing, and they've discovered this sort of sickly yellow colour, a dark green and a sort of brown. Somewhere around 1820 they start discovering reds and things like that as well that they can use. So this particular palette puts you solidly in that sort of 40-year period, 1780 to 1820. And again, it's relatively posh. So your vicar has got a nice posh set of bowls, ultimately, out there. But he's a vicar, of course he's wealthy though. Yes. No. But yeah, back then they were always wealthy. Pearlware's kind of the last development before we get onto modern whitewares. So that's a modern whiteware, although not that modern. It's a 19th century one where they cut up sponges, and the little kids who are pretty much slave labour in the pottery factories decorate them with these sponges that are cut into various patterns. And that's part of the long lineage of which our modern white pots are part of. You can see a few things with this glass. This one has a squishy bottom, as it were. This one has a straight bottom. If you hold it up to the light, you'll just be able to see it's either a dark green or amber, very dark amber kind of colour. It's called forest glass because it's made in forests, because they use a lot of bracken which they burn into ashes. Acts as a flux for the sand that they're melting. Glass is made of silica, and you can't just melt sand into glass because you can't create high enough temperatures. If you get a lightning strike in the desert, that can form a natural tube of glass because that forms incredibly high temperatures. But in terms of people with their technology of the day, they have to add a flux to that sand to lower the melting temperature, at which it will turn into glass. And so they're using bracken basically burned into ashes to act as the flux. You get the happy little German friends in the 17th century, and in about the mid 17th century again, you start getting glass bottles coming in, and the shapes change quite dramatically over time. So the earliest types are more like this. No, they're not, but with a great big kick in the bottom. So this, what we call the kick. And the shapes change over time. My drawing is rubbish, but still, here, and eventually they arrive at a bit longer neck than that. Oh dear, that's awful. That kind of shape. The way they make them initially is they blow them on a rod, so you'd have the blowing rod in this end, and you inflate a bubble of glass. And then your mate comes with another rod and sticks it on that end and pushes the base in.
Oh, that's why it's right.
And then when you look, there's often damage around here where the rod's been pulled off. None of these are early enough for a good example. But you can just see some irregularity around there, which is basically where the rod was attached. When they do that, obviously the glass squishes out and modifies the form. They start making wooden moulds, and if you wet that wooden mould, you can then put your bubble in it, and you can form your bubble into a shape a bit like that. Then when you stick your pontil on the bottom, that comes up, and you end up with a bit of a squish on the outside. So that tells me that this has been blown into a mould and then modified. So when you've got the squish like that.